swim, bike, run. This is Endurance FM with Graham Brown.
Hello and welcome to Endurance FM. We are all about the entrepreneurs of endurance. Listeners, get on board today because we're going to talk about living a life out of your depth, challenging yourself to break through what you thought was possible in all aspects of life, health, business, personal goals. And to do this, I'm joined by an extreme kayaker, an ocean rower, expedition guide, founder and head of My Next Adventure, Guinness World Record holder. And let's see, all the other accolades that we talked about off air, he's too modest to tell us exactly what he's done, but summited Kilimanjaro 4 times, Everest Base Camp, summited Mont Blanc, etc., etc. We're going to find out in the next half an hour, guys, because Mike Jones, welcome to the show.
Hey, Graham, thanks for having me on.
I was just saying there that all the things that you've done with your life, and when we were talking off air, you were quite modest about what you've achieved. Not just summited all these different mountains and gone to these crazy places, but rode across the Atlantic and so on. Do you ever sort of have to kind of have a quiet moment and write down and remind yourself what you've done? Or is it just kind of like, I'm not interested in keeping score?
Yeah, I suppose I didn't have a target. It's not like a 7 summits thing or an adventure triple crown, or, you know, I'm not in that mindset as such of kind of chasing things. I just see interesting adventures and seek them out. Sometimes you stumble upon them by accident, like rowing across the Atlantic was something that I stumbled across through books. Sometimes it's somebody invites you to join them on something. Yeah, every now and then I do kind of pinch myself, and I've been thinking quite a lot lately. People keep mentioning to me about writing a book, and I'm looking at maybe trying to get into some speaking and trying to, I suppose, share some of my experiences. And every now and then I have a little flashback of something daft that I did, like sailing a tall ship across the Irish Sea when I was 15, and I had to lie about my age to get on board. So those kind of stories are things that are buried somewhere in the background that I often just forget about, and every now and then I recount them to myself.
You got to recount them. Your grandkids will want to hear all these stories, right? Don't forget them.
Absolutely,
so please document them. And I just love this part. We'll talk about rowing across the Atlantic in a minute. But this is a funny part of your story, and you've just kind of alluded to it there, is that you applied to join the crew rowing across the Atlantic, even though you had never rowed before. And I thought, when I read that, I thought, what? Hang on a second. You can't just go and row across the Atlantic. We'll talk about how big that feat is in a minute, without having any experience of rowing. Or can you?
I suppose as a Sea Scout growing up, we were always mucking around in boats, and we'd literally anything that floated, we'd get in it and we'd try and stick a sail on it or have a paddle out the side of it or maybe some sort of oar. But I'd never formally been trained to row. I'd never been in a sliding seat boat, so like the boats you see in the Olympics and stuff where the seats slide up and down. Anything I'd ever sat in was just a wooden plank, and you put your arse on it, and you know, had pretty rudimentary oars sticking out through these cast iron oar lock things, and it was all, you know, very, very rudimentary stuff that I would have done. So, you know, stepping onto a boat with the seats sliding up and down and your feet in straps and, you know, all this kind of professional style equipment, that was all brand new to me. And it's almost like it is pretty much a different sport really from any type of rowing I'd ever experienced.
Right, so you weren't a complete beginner. Okay, so that's a bit of a relief. Let's talk about what you do. What's your day job, your business, My Next Adventure? Just give us an idea of what you do day to day and what you do up there. And we'll talk about how you got to that point in your life.
Yeah, so I day to day, I'm trying to get out on the water most days, even if it's not working with clients. So I suppose, My Next Adventure is an adventure tour company, and we specialize in guided kayaking tours. So most days I'm out on the water with clients. If I'm not out on the water with clients, I try and get out myself. And it's a really exciting time to be starting the business because there's a lot of really good positive stuff happening in our locality here in Killaloo and on Lough Derg, and the River Shannon, as some people will know, it's the longest river in Ireland. So we're based kind of near the southern tip of that. So we've got all this 200 kilometers of waterway to explore, and that's part of the growth of the business, is to start exploring more and more of that and take people on longer and longer adventures. Ultimately, you know, part of the dream for the business is to actually be offering 2-week trips down the Shannon for people to come to Ireland and experience Ireland by waterway and by kayak, with a nice friendly Irish guide, and hopefully if that works, then the pension is sorted.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's a great thing, especially if you're really passionate about what you do. You know, you're not having to grind away in an office 9 to 5. We'll come back to my next adventure in a bit, and I especially want to talk about why you started that and how you're growing that business. But on top of that as well, I think it's important to note you also do freelance expedition guiding, right? So, you know, and it's not just sort of small expeditions you're doing pretty full-on ones. What kind of things have you been doing recently?
Last October, I went to Everest Base Camp. So that was my first time guiding out there. So out to Nepal for a 2.5-week trip. And that's spectacular. I'd been to Nepal on a kayaking expedition when I was 21 and always vowed I'd go back. And people used to talk, it was funny actually, when I did that trip, people talked about it as a trip of a lifetime. And I actually used to tell them to not say that, because for me it wasn't a trip of a lifetime. It was just a trip, and it was an incredible one. But I knew it would happen again in my lifetime. So it was great to get back to Nepal after 15 years and experience the people and culture and everything there, and then to get into the high Himalayas, and see mountains like Amadabalam and Pamori, and obviously Everest and Nuptse and Lhotse, and it's just all these mountains that you read about, just to be in them and see the scale and get a perspective on what the challenge actually is to get to the summit of them. And then with the same company that I do that work with, I've also been out to Kilimanjaro 4 times and guided people up that. This year they're sending me off to Machu Picchu, and then they're sending me back to Everest Base Camp as well. So it's a tough job, but somebody's got to do it.
Well, I want to know, is that sort of, when you do something like that, do you feel like, oh, it's just work, I don't really get to enjoy it because I have to look after all these, I have to look after the rookies and get them up the mountain? Or are you actually enjoying it as much as these people? Is it actually an experience for you as well as a guide?
I suppose part of the experience for me is actually guiding the people. So it's I enjoy when they're enjoying themselves, I'm enjoying myself. So sometimes that takes a little bit of work on my part to make sure they're enjoying themselves, but that work is worthwhile when you see a smile on their face. And if something does go wrong, I almost revel in the challenge of that as well, and trying to overcome challenges. So if somebody is sick or injured, or there's a logistical problem, which does happen, you're traveling in developing world countries, so you do end up with little issues as best made plans you might have, but from time to time things just don't work out, and sometimes I just revel in actually the accomplishment of solving problems and fixing things. But of course it's nice as well when it all runs smoothly and you can just sit back and relax and it all flows and you really feel like you're on a proper holiday then. But no, overall I've had 99% of it's been very enjoyable. I've had a couple of little issues here and there that you learn from and you move on and you hope they don't happen again. But overall, it's more of a holiday, I think, than it is a job.
Well, it's great though. And as you say, somebody has to do it. Let's talk about climbing Everest, because statistically, more people have been into space or climbed Everest than have rode the Atlantic, right?
Yes.
That's the bragging rights of the guy who made it across the Atlantic. Let's talk about this adventure that you went off. We've got to go back 2010, right? That you went across the Atlantic with a crew of 6. March the 11th is the day that you landed. So let's wind that back. You must have started around about, mid-January or something. When did you?
I suppose the full story of the false starts. We were third time lucky on our start. So we started, originally we were set to start on the 4th or 5th of January. And we tried 2 days in a row to get out of Morocco. Port called Agadir in Morocco, and we got blown back in by the wind, had to be rescued. So we almost didn't start. We almost ended up on a beach in Africa.
That was a bit of
our legs, but
exactly, tails between your legs. We already got around the corner and got blown back into port.
Yeah, that was quite embarrassing. Thankfully, the local TV cameras, which had come down to wave us off, had left by the time we came in the first time. The second time, there wasn't quite the same fanfare. And then the Moroccan authorities were threatening to confiscate our boat and our passports and everything because they thought we were a shower of jokers. Wow. So we had a bit of negotiation to do. And eventually then, I think it was on the 12th of January or so that we left. And once we set off, then we had nice calm seas for the first 4 or 5 days. We rode down past the Canaries, and we had every sort of weather in between there and Barbados, which was our eventual landing spot.
Right, so on the day that you left, that mid-January, when you were leaving Agadir in Morocco, and you finally sat in that boat, and this was it, you're off. What was going through your mind at that time?
On the final departure, it was a large amount of relief that we're actually getting underway, having had the 2 false starts. And then it was just that feeling of, right, this is it. This is total commitment now. There's no turning back on this one. There's no, lads, I'm not enjoying this so much. Can you drop me off? Or I'll just wait for the next bus to come by and jump on that. This was 100% commitment. You were on the boat. You were reliant on everybody else. They were reliant on you. And there was no point in bitching or whinging or crying about it, because you chose this road and you just had to stick at it. And that was one of my kind of, I suppose, key attitude or mindset things for the entire journey was, you chose this, so don't even dream about whinging about it. Because you should have known this was coming. I think that helped a lot. I think it helped an awful lot in terms of keeping a positive mindset for most of the trip.
Yeah, I imagine as well, because we could talk about how it actually takes place technically, but on the day to day, I would assume that you're experiencing a lot of discomfort, right? In that situation, for all mental, physical, everything. So just give us an idea of what a day would be like when you were out rowing the Atlantic.
So we worked a 2-hour shift pattern. So we were 2 hours rowing and 2 hours resting at a time. So essentially we're rowing for a total of 12 hours a day, and you were not rowing for 12 hours a day, but at least half of that you tried to sleep. So that then left you in around 6 hours to eat, wash yourself, do any chores on board the boat. We all had kind of designated jobs depending on our skill set or our role on board. So that would be, say, the skipper would have looked after most of the navigation stuff. I would have been looking after making water with our desalinator machine. So yeah, everybody had their chores. So it was quite a busy day. And one of the things we never did was get bored. There was always something to be doing. And if you weren't doing something, you should probably have been sleeping, because sleep deprivation was a big part of it. Because you were only getting small bites of sleep. If you had time, you just put your head down and try and get some shut eye to help your body recover, because as you'll know, as an Ironman, you don't get stronger from training. You get stronger from recovering. So that sleep is all important, and if you're not getting that, your body is just debilitating all the time.
Mm-hmm. It's quite tempting though, isn't it? I mean, I don't know if it's something that's hardwired into our minds, is it, to keep pushing ourselves and think that, if I'm going to sleep, then either I'm letting the other guys down, or I'm not pulling my weight here. Did you feel that kind of pressure, or did it something you had to learn, or were you just kind of easy, I'll just flop out and fall straight asleep, I have no problems with that?
Yeah, you do get, a little bit of FOMO, a bit of fear of missing out to an extent. Do I want to stay up and see the first sunset and those kind of things, or there might be dolphins. I won't go to sleep, but ultimately there's probably going to be dolphins the next day as well. And you kind of get sick of dolphins after a while, and you're going to get 50 or 60 sunsets. And one of the things that happens pretty much every day, no matter where you are in the world, is the sun comes up and the sun goes down. So you're going to have a lot more sunsets in life too. So you have to get over that pretty fast and realize that self-discipline is actually, one of the key things to not only success in these things, but actually enjoying it as well. And for me, it was as much about the enjoyment of the experience and trying to revel and really soak up the whole experience, and not come back and say that I hated it or wouldn't do it again. And in fact, that worked out for me, because it was something that I'd love to do again.
Yeah, well, I want to ask you what the high point of that journey was, but before we do that, I want to talk about what the low point of that journey was. There must have been dark moments, because nobody can get through 57 days without going through some serious dark moments. And no matter how much enthusiasm and motivation you set out with, you're a human being, you're under pressure cooker situations, you're in a very tough environment, it's dangerous, you're going to feel, and you're going to be exposed to the worst of you as well as the best of you, right? So do you remember having sort of dark moments that you went through where you felt like just going, screw this, I want to get off, I'm happy just to jump off the boat and swim the last 20 days myself right home, whatever it is? Did you have those kind of crazy moments where you just had enough, or how did it manifest with you?
I suppose there's two distinct times, and one of them, it wasn't actually, I don't remember feeling that low much, but it was a long wait. We essentially spent 5.5 days sitting waiting for the wind to change with a thing called sea anchor out. which is like putting a parachute in the water. Basically, it essentially stops the boat from drifting backwards too fast. But we couldn't row the boat. There was no point. It would have been like running on a treadmill that was going too fast for you to keep up, and you just keep getting shot out the back. So it was that was somewhat of a low, because it was hard to just stay motivated. We'd just gotten into routine, and we were 2 weeks into our trip, and all of a sudden we were stopped and just had to sit around and wait. But I think that the total lowest point came with it was somewhere around 4 or 5 days to go, and we were, you're into that last week, and you're really sensing, you can almost smell the beer and the burgers on the shore. And the low point was for sure when my wife was due to fly out on the Saturday, and she had booked her flight Saturday to Saturday, and we'd hoped to get in that weekend and have the full week in Barbados to catch up with everybody and recoup a little bit. And then overnight we just had this horrendous current that we rode into, and we kind of got trapped in it for about 12 hours, and it just felt like we were going nowhere. We were pretty much standing still at best. And our GPS was telling us we were actually heading somewhere towards Canada instead of Barbados, which is a long way away. And we eventually broke free of it, but at that stage we were going slow, and the morale on the boat just went absolutely through the floor, and it was a collective drop in morale, which was probably the first time it had happened on the trip. And that was, I think, a key thing, in that we up until then, I think if anybody had a low point, everybody else would help raise their spirits, but this was the first time we actually had a collective low on board, because everybody just felt, right, at best here, I might actually get in, and my family may have flown home again, because we could go over a week still at this if we stay going at these speeds. And I remember very, very vividly the skipper having to drag himself out of it, and he is a great guy. Drag himself out of it and just basically tell us all to cop on and snap out of it, and we need to just get back to the job at hand and row, and it doesn't matter when we get in, but we need to just get the boat across the Atlantic and get the job done. Everything else is largely irrelevant to that. We need to just stay in our own world and stop getting sucked into the world of other people's travel plans and working to their deadlines. We need to just focus on what we can do, and that's what we got back to. But definitely that few hours that just sunk morale on board the boat.
Mm-hmm. I imagine, because you were so close as well. I mean, what does it take to get through that? Is it just a case of, never give up, or man up, or suck it up, that type of mindset? Do you need a lot more than just that to get through such a grueling challenge?
I think for me anyway, I'm quite a rational thinker and quite a logical person, so I need to tap these things up in some element of logic. The fluffy stuff of jumping up and down and screaming and that kind of psych up stuff doesn't necessarily always work on me. I need to see, that's the goal. How are we going to get there? And then just focus on the little things that are going to make that one big thing work. And that's what motivates me. And then you get small wins, you get small successes. You keep your average speed above 2 knots for an hour, and then you do that for 2 hours, and then for 3 hours, and then all of a sudden you're knocking out 50, 60, 70 miles a day again instead of 5 or 6 miles. And then you start seeing the success build, and that just brings the mood up again. And it's not always a flick of a switch that you can go from low to high. Sometimes it just takes that time to build up again and build your confidence and morale.
Mm-hmm. So when you're doing this, are you consciously blocking out the big goal and just focusing on these small wins and these small sort of short-term waypoints, if you like, that you're working towards? Does that sort of help you get through?
Yeah. Like there's a couple of milestones within the big challenge. Obviously, is get to the finish. The milestones along the way are things like halfway or 500 miles to go. And then on a daily basis, we'd have a daily mile count, and you're always looking at that, trying to see what you can, can you beat the previous day? If you did, how did you do it? Was there something you did different on the boat? Was it from extra effort, or was it just the weather or the current and tides? And constantly analysing the previous day's performance in order to try and improve, and try and keep the boat moving at a week, I suppose, what we would consider a fair speed. And that was always in around the 3 knots or 3 nautical miles an hour to kind of speed. And that was even the shorter term goal. So even within each shift, you were checking the speed regularly to see if you were managing to maintain a reasonable boat speed. And that was sometimes a nod to your crewmates to, get their act together and get back to the oars quickly if they, or get started on their shift, so we could get 3 people rowing again if somebody was taking a break for some personal reason or something like that. But yeah, there was always some goal, be it very small in the short term or building up from days to weeks to right out the full 2 months, I suppose, almost of the trip.
So I want to ask you now, Mike, what was the highlight of that trip? Was it getting to Barbados, or was it something else that we may have missed out?
Yeah, obviously getting to the finish. It's funny, when you do long expeditions like this, it's almost like Stockholm syndrome. You don't want to leave the boat and leave the guys. So the finish is actually quite a high point, but it's also strangely a low point. And it's because it's, it means it's ending. You're not going to be doing this anymore. You've got to go back and face reality in your day job. But there was lots of little points along the way, lots of really just funny moments. Lots of times we just made each other laugh on board the boat. It's actually, the landscape, although it's quite spectacular, it's incessantly boring too, because you're rowing in the middle of this massive big blue field that's a little bit lumpy at times. And these incredible blue skies, and you're just waking up to the same thing day in, day out. So there's not a lot of change or variety in the landscape. But what does change is kind of the mood on board and the laughs and the giggles and, these random little moments and stories that you'd share with people. We had a French-Canadian lady called Mylene on board, and I used to travel at night time to keep myself entertained of getting our skipper Matt, who used to sit between me and Mylene when we'd be rowing together, to translate swear words or to explain swear words to her that she hadn't learned in English yet. So I used to try and think of the most profane things that I could possibly say to confuse her, and then because she couldn't hear me properly, Matt would have to explain them to her. So I used to get quite a lot of enjoyment out of that.
She would have been fluent after 57 days, I'm sure.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, she learned quite a few things she wasn't expecting in terms of increasing her vocabulary, I think.
Yeah, awesome. So, okay, I wonder as well. I mean, you talk about the dynamic of working with other people doing this. Could you have done it alone? I know physically it would have been more challenging, but how much more of a challenge would it have been mentally to go out there and do it on your own? Huge challenge. I think I suppose, long story short, I actually got on the boat through a bizarre Facebook encounter with a guy called Sean McGowan, who is an Irish guy. He's the first Irish guy to row solo across the Atlantic. And I got in touch with him to wish him luck. I didn't know the guy at all, wished him luck. And he came back and said, if you ever wanted to give it a go, these guys are looking for a crew member. So I'd never spoken to Sean at all. But he was starting very much the same time as us, but he was leaving from the Canary Islands. And he had spent 2 years preparing for this, invested his pretty much his life savings in the campaign. And the first time I spoke to him, he rang our sat phone middle of the Atlantic, and it was quite a bizarre conversation. Mm-hmm. But you could tell by his voice, he was really, really struggling. And I met with him afterwards, and some of the stories he recounted, he's an extremely positive and motivated guy, but he was challenged to the absolute limit when he was doing it on his own. And you do hear stories like that regularly from people who have done these things on their own. So, yeah, I wouldn't count it out. After saying all that, I wouldn't count it out. But I now know what it takes, and the difference between doing it as a team and solo is vast. And a lot of that isn't actually the physical pressure. A lot of people would assume it's the physical stress of it. It's actually the mental stress of being on your own, I think, is a huge challenge. Yeah. Sean was out there for 117 days on his own. Which is a long time to spend with yourself, even if you're a big fan of yourself. 117 days is a long time, so that's it's pretty incredible stuff with very limited communication with the outside. Yeah, I suppose any sort of physical challenge is that after a certain amount of time, the difference between doing it on your own and in a team physically makes little difference, doesn't it? The margins tend to get smaller and smaller, but the difference between doing it individually and as a team mentally gets bigger and bigger, right? Because all that stuff that you talk about that got you through wouldn't be there, and you'll just be kind of left with your own voice in your head, plus a few other voices maybe that you've conjured up over the time. So I imagine that must be a real challenge. I want to sort of bring up something that you posted yourself on your blog before you left. Mm-hmm. You may or may not remember posting this, but I'm assuming it was you that posted it because it had your name to it. And it says, This was a year before you left, more or less, or 6 months, I can't remember. It says, ever since reading about ocean rowing in a book a few years ago, the crazy notion that I could do it has been stuck in my head. After about 4 years of trying to convince friends to join me, I'm running out of options. All I need is one person just as mad and passionate as me to jump on board so we can start planning a crossing. Going solo has never really appealed to me, but with my options running low, it may be my only option. Now, as far as I know, you wrote that in September 2009. So you were kind of already considering it as a last resort right back then. What was going on at that time? You wanted to go, but you kind of hadn't found a crew. What was the sort of scenario? Explain it to us.
Yeah, so I'd read a couple of books over the years about ocean rowing, and much to my mother's regret, she actually bought me one of the first ones, and she wasn't too happy that I found the bug. So I'd come across what was called the Woodvale race, which is now called the Talisker Atlantic Challenge, and was the biannual race across, and there had been a couple of Irish crews in it, some of them successful, one of them actually capsized and rescued, so kind of crazy tales coming back from it. And it just, I don't know why I wanted to row across the Atlantic, and I think part of it maybe is, when I was growing up in Cove, Cork, it's quite a famous port and massive natural harbour, and I always remember looking out of the harbour at the entrance into the harbour and thinking that America was just around the corner, and not really having any concept of scale. And this is when I was 5, 6, 7 years of age, and as I got older and more adventurous and joined the Scouts and went fishing with my dad, we'd go outside the harbour, and it was always just what's over the next horizon and what's over the next horizon, and possibly it's rooted somewhere in there that I wanted to cross the Atlantic Ocean, and I wanted to do it in, as part of an adventure. I didn't want to just get on a ship and cross it. I wanted to do it as an adventure. I tried. I'd asked all my best friends. A couple of them had thought about it long and hard, and we'd looked at the finances of it and talked about how it would work and when we could, get our schedules to collide so that we'd actually time it, that we'd be able to put a 2-year campaign together to raise all the money and do all the training. But it just, nobody else's life fit, and nobody wanted it, I suppose, as much as I did. And in around that time, I'd been looking pretty hard at, how could I finance something, and it just, I suppose I was just giving up on it. And I stumbled upon the crew the lads looking for crewmates, and it was one of those strange things where you kind of are about to give up on the dream, and it just fell into my lap as soon as I'd stopped trying. And it was just time to go. It was just time to do it. I was very fortunate that I had a good job. We were just gone into recession in Ireland. I suppose the Celtic Tiger had gone and buried itself somewhere, and we were full blown the recession in Ireland. But I still had a good job, and I'd saved a lot of money over the years, so it allowed me the opportunity to afford to do it, both financially, and then also my job at the time was running an adventure centre, and the winter time was our downtime, so my bosses allowed me the physical time to actually go and do it too, which was huge, because that meant that I could actually tie those two things together. And that's what makes a lot of these adventures possible, is not just the want to do it, but the resources in terms of finance or whatever you need to make it happen, and then the time, and whether you have to borrow that time from a job or you have to make that time in some other way. They're all key things that you need to align at the same time, and I was very fortunate to get them to align for me.
Well, the stars were in alignment for you at that time, right there at that point in your life, weren't they? It couldn't have come at a better time, and you had all the opportunities, everything was lined up. What I want to know, Mike, is a question which I've heard posed to adventurers like yourself, people who've done crazy adventures like you. I don't say crazy with all due respect, because, I think it was phenomenal what you've achieved, right? And I read these stories about people who climb Everest as well. And one of the questions that people get asked is that, after you've done it, do you feel a sense of peace in yourself that wasn't there before? Or do you feel like I've got to go out and do something bigger now? And the reason why I ask, personally, doing Ironman triathlon, you feel that when you do it, right, that's it, I'll never do another one because it's so much training, it's a year of training. But then you do it and you think, oh, I could have done it 25 minutes faster, or that kind of thing. These kind of things get in your head and you think, oh no, there's unfinished business. And it's a theme that comes up a lot with the guests I have on Endurance FM, this idea of unfinished business. I did this race, like I'm thinking about one of my guests recently who did Ultraman, which is like, an insane Ironman back to back, day after day. But, after doing that, thinking, I've got to go and do it again now because I want to do a better time. How about it for yourself when you crossed the Atlantic? Did you feel that kind of Zen-like peace, or did you feel unfinished business?
I suppose the initial feeling is somewhat of joy in that you've set out to achieve something and you've achieved it, and you've enjoyed yourself along the way, which was, like I said earlier, really important to me, that I'd enjoy the experience. And then there's I suppose not quite a regret, but there's a bit of a low point. And you hear a lot of athletes talking about this when they win gold medals and things like that, that there's almost this kind of regret or emptiness for a little while, because you've been so focused on this goal for maybe 4 years, maybe 2 years, maybe 6 months, whatever it is, but it's been a big part of your life for so long that you don't have anything to go for that period of time. And that was something we shared as a crew, I suppose. And I remember talking to one of my crewmates a few weeks afterwards, and he was we were both probably in quite a low place, but he seemed a little bit lower than I was, and we were kind of reassuring each other that we just have to just refocus and get back into real life. And then once you get over that phase, and then you start thinking about, right, well, part of my real life still has to be adventure. So what's going to be next? And the next challenge for us actually had been to row the Indian Ocean, but unfortunately that didn't happen for interesting reasons, I suppose, in that the boat that we were supposed to use capsized and the lads were rescued in the middle of the Atlantic, and we didn't have a boat to do it with. So that's
a bit ominous,
why we didn't row. Yes, that was a bit of a nuisance, not to get to do that, but that would have been a cool challenge. But I quickly substituted that with kayaking around Ireland, so I filled that gap. But yeah, there's always just that sense of not so much unfinished business, but what else can I do? What else am I capable of? Where else could I go and explore? And I'm fortunate in that I have a skill set that allows me to explore different places in different ways, be it in a kayak or a rowing boat or in a sailing boat or by foot in the mountains. So that's really interesting to me, that I can change up the terrain and the duration of the adventures and the cost of the adventures, so that I can always do something. Even if I don't have a lot of time or a lot of money, I can try and find something to do.
Yeah, I'm curious as well as to what the next adventure is, but save that for the end of the show, because I can't believe you don't have something that's inside your head at the moment. It's got inside your head and it won't go away, but we'll come to that. Let's talk about starting your business. How does that sort of compare with the challenges that you've undertaken? And also curious to know, like, what kind of parallels there are and what kind of things you've learned mentally and so on. Or are these completely different things? Because I know it's sort of an overdone theme, isn't it? Like, for example, there's a lot of sport used as analogies in business, like never give up and all that kind of stuff. But, what I find was interesting is that I read, I can't remember, somebody's biography about, I think it was the Mountain Madness guys that, had all the problems a few years back on Everest. But they were saying that, they take paid clients up Everest, and, their number one responsibility is not to get them to the top, but the safety of the client, right? And they've said that, of all the people that go up Everest, who is most likely to succeed in their clients? It's a question that was asked. And they said, well, I know who's most likely to not succeed. And they said the people they had the biggest issues with were athletes, right? Because the athletes are so trained not to give up, right? That, that's their stick. They learn this, they're disciplined, they constantly on these repeat cycles, constantly and pushing harder and harder and harder. But the difference between never giving up in sport and climbing a mountain is significant, isn't it? Because one, if you never go off on sport, you might get sick, you might get an injury. So what? Climbing up Everest, you could die, right? So these guides said that, we always worry when we take athletes up, because if you tell them, like, you've got to go back down to the next camp, they're the ones that say, no, I can do it. But it's the guys who are more calculated that are easier to deal with. So a bit of a long-winded way round to the question, but I'm curious to know what sort of parallels there have been with yourself, between your adventures and business. Have you found that it's kind of made you more rounded, a better person in business, or do you see this as kind of different worlds?
I think they're different and they're connected in different ways. I think after I'd gone around Ireland on my own in the sea kayak, I had a lot of time on my own to think and ponder and figure out what it is I wanted to do with my life. And somewhere in there was the seed for running my own kayak touring business and sharing the experience of kayaking in wild places with other people. And that was the seed, I suppose, that has now grown into my next adventure, which is the business I run. And definitely there are parallels there in terms of confidence, backing myself. That's something that a phrase I use quite a lot, is that I choose to back myself, and with 100% confidence. If I get stuck into something, I'm not going to do it half-heartedly, and that's something that at times you have to do in adventure. Yes, you have to know when to quit, and you have to analyze the options and see what the terrain ahead is like, and what the weather conditions are like, and that's very similar to business, I suppose, in terms of strategizing as to where you're going to move to next. Where do you invest your time, your money, your efforts into, and the I suppose in business can be the financial climate and the economy around you, and the terrain ahead can be the physical geography or the area that you're operating in, and how the businesses are made up in that space. And yeah, you're just using that analytical way, and then once you choose a route and you choose a method, and you've agreed to yourself that the conditions are right for this, you have to just go for it, and you get stuck in 100%. So I probably very subliminally do all that stuff. It's not something that I do overtly. I don't ever sit down in a sense and draw these parallels, but subliminally somewhere in my head I think, yeah, I have learned a lot from adventure, and from going out and trying things and failing, and from things going wrong and having these epic days where you have these crazy times where you're wondering why on earth I did this, but they're all, if you're not learning from those, then you're doing something wrong. Exactly. And then if you can in some way draw from them in other aspects of your life, it's a great bonus.
Did you go into that thinking, I know you talked about kayaking around Ireland, so you'd already gone through probably lots and lots of different ideas in your head. When you started the business, you're quite analytical, so did you plan everything? Did you say, right, okay, this is the product, this is the market, this is how we're going to market it, this is the pricing, etc.? Or did you just go out and say, I'm just going to do the best kayaking experience possible? Where did you sit on that scale?
A bit of both. Like I said, I want to do this better than anybody else does it. This is going to be a world-class service. This wasn't going to be the best in Killaloo or the best in County Clare or the best in Ireland. I wanted to do something that was world-class. And I know from experience that the scenery and the landscape we have here is world-class, and it's something that can contend with some of the best places in the world. And I wanted to do a world-class service to complement that. But in order to do that, I needed to be strategic about it. And I was actually very, very fortunate. Just as I was setting up the business, I got invited to do a course with our national tourism agency about how to market your business and telling your story. And there was 3 workshops which were run by 3 really, really interesting ladies who were all experts in marketing and storytelling. And they essentially helped me shape the product. And I was very, very fortunate. I think I probably would... I wouldn't have done as good a job certainly without them, and without the support of that course. And that was just perfect timing. It was great, and that allowed me to put a lot of shape to what I was offering. So when I went to the market with it, it was ready. It was good to go. And I've still had tweaks and little things changing it. But overall, I've actually changed the product very little since day one. I'm very proud of the fact that I went out into the market with something that I knew would work, and it did.
What are you doing differently, though? Because you mentioned that you wanted to do differently to what everybody else is doing. So you want to create the best possible experience. I'm sure everybody wants to create the best possible experience. What are you focusing on that your average adventure tour operator, kayak tour operator isn't doing?
I suppose it's kind of, to go to the marginal gains kind of theory of just doing lots of little things really well. So the equipment is top notch and it's fit for purpose. The quality of guiding is excellent. The environment that we use is excellent. We have some added extras along the way that we stop and we make some hot chocolates and coffees, and we make homemade cookies and give it to the clients and stuff. So, and then we take photos along the way and share them with people afterwards. So there's lots of little things that add up. And one of the key things that we do is we don't try and teach people to kayak. We just go on a journey in the kayaks. A lot of places, they want to teach you to kayak. We just bought kayaks that will go straight for people, and it's a lot easier to just then enjoy the environment that you're in and really just enjoy the natural, the interesting natural features, as well as then hearing a little bit about the history. And although a lot of the trips are very similar, we try and tailor it a little bit to people's interest then as well. So if somebody has a particular interest in the history and heritage of the area, we'll talk a little bit more about that. If they're more interested in the bird life and plant life, we'll talk a little bit more about that. So although they're very similar, we customize little features within them. So it's not that we do any one thing better than anybody. We just make sure that everything that we do is of a really good standard and that we're consistent with that. You know, every time we go out, we do it consistently, and we do it to not just our best, but the best that it can actually be.
Very interesting. That whole thing about not teaching people to kayak as well, that's refreshing and an interesting way of approaching it. I suppose for you as well, running the show, it must be more motivating, waking up in the morning thinking, all right, we're going to go out and do this tour, this experience, rather than, right, I've got to teach these 4 guys how to drill on the kayak, right? I've done that 10,000 times. For you, if it's more motivating as well, the business is more sustainable, the experience is better for the people involved in it, not just the people you work with, but also your customers, right? So I think that must be a key part of it. You've consciously said that you're not going to do that because that allows you then to focus more on the experience, and ultimately that's what your customers want. I assume they want an experience, right? They don't necessarily want to learn how to kayak. I mean, just enough to get by and not drown, right? That's all they need to know, right?
Absolutely, yeah. It's just give them the minimum. I have a nice a phrase in my head that I came across a couple of years ago. I was sailing on the Wild Atlantic Way in Ireland with a Finnish friend of mine. She was doing the whole journey, and I joined her for a day, and her brother was with her. And we were cycling side by side, my friend and I, and her brother cycled up alongside us, and he said to me, "Oh, we have the same job, we do the same thing." And I was like, "This guy's from Finland, he must do kayaking stuff as well." And I goes, "All right, what do you do?" He says, "I sell smiles." And that phrase just stuck with me. And I think it's a brilliant phrase, and it's a brilliant motivation to wake up in the morning to think that, my job is essentially selling smiles, and people talk about creating experiences and sharing memories and all these things, but fundamentally what I do is I sell smiles. I try and put a smile on people's face, and I do that through taking them on adventures and bringing them into the outdoors. And I'm very privileged to get opportunities to do that. Yeah,
that's awesome as well. And the TripAdvisor feedback speaks for itself. You're ranked number 1 of things to do in Killaloo. But you've also got, I think, I can't remember to date, 55 5-star TripAdvisor feedback. So there's none 4, 3, 2, 1 star, right? Everybody's giving you 5 stars. Phenomenal.
Yeah, well, that's a big motivation for me, is to try and maintain that. And the debt starts to drop. There's something wrong. There's absolutely no reason we shouldn't be offering a 5-star service every time we take a group out. And that starts from when they make initial contact with us, and even before that, the way we present the business online or offline, it all has to be very professional. So as soon as people make contact or get in touch with us, it has to be a 5-star service right through till the final email when we say thanks to them for coming along, and we send them on their pictures from their trip. And that's we invite them as well to review us on TripAdvisor, and always hope that they have had a 5-star experience. But we know that in between we've done the best service that we can possibly do, and hopefully that they would have found it a 5-star experience.
Well, you're doing it right, and I think it's fantastic what you're doing. I'm going to ask you on behalf of the listeners, those people that look at Mike Jones and say, "Yeah, I want to do like Mike." Not necessarily a kayak or an adventure business, but I have this passion. There's this thing that I'm really passionate about. Okay, I want to start a business, and I want to build a business out of it. And it could be something that I've achieved in the past, or something, I'm staring out the office window right now thinking, no, this is no way to spend my day, right? This is not what I'm here for. There's something else that I'm here for, and I want to go out and fulfill it. And I look at Mike, and he's done it. He's doing it. He's down that path, right? But I don't know where to start. How do I make this happen? What can I do? Help me out, Mike. What sort of things would you suggest to somebody like that, who maybe isn't as fearless as you? Maybe they're not an ocean rower or a mountain guide. More on the sort of the less mortal, the more mortal scale of existence, right? How could you advise somebody like that starting out?
I suppose the key thing for me, and it might sound a bit odd, is don't just do what you want to do. And the downfall of that is you end up being the only person that's willing to pay for it, and ultimately, money makes the world go round. We're not all chasing $1 million, but we do need to put bread on the table and keep a roof over our heads. So I'm not going to get particularly rich doing this business, not in financial terms, but I did have bills to pay. So I did need to choose something that was a blend of both what I was passionate about, but also something there was a market for. There was something that I could actually sell. So I could have gone down the route of doing kayaking in a number of different ways, but I know they wouldn't have worked. I know if I'd offered kayaking, whitewater kayaking courses, coaching lessons, all this sort of stuff, there's no market. The market's not big enough to sustain me. So I managed to tap into a market which does exist and which is growing. And that's into the adventure tourism market, and in particular in our local area of families. So, I delved a little bit deeper and figured out where, what people were doing, what they were looking for, what they were willing to pay. And thankfully I didn't quite strike gold, I suppose, maybe silver or something. But I've managed to find a market that exists, and I'm tapping into that. And it's like I say, it's growing. So hopefully I'll continue to tap into that, and it'll continue to bear fruit for me over the coming years. And if I need to shift direction or change, I'm willing to do that too. I'm constantly observing the horizon and seeing what's coming. Is there a new opportunity and a new direction I can turn the business? And one of the big pluses of being a solopreneur, being out on my own like this, is actually being able to shift direction really quickly. Just a quick spin of the wheel, and I can change and be doing something different and create new products without having to go through layers of bureaucracy and management, which I would have had in my previous job. And that's quite refreshing too. Yeah. But also a huge part of the challenge.
Well, it's a big part of it, isn't it? And that advice, as you say, don't necessarily do what you want to do, but you've also got to find a market. A lot of entrepreneurs get kind of led on by this idea of following your passion. And it can be kind of dangerous advice, isn't it? Because I think people think that this combination of follow your passion plus never give up is the key to success. But it's not, is it? Because, what happens if nobody else is passionate about that and you still never give up? That's a really bad situation to be in, isn't it? But did you sort of go out you're analytical by nature. Did you go out and research this analytically, or you just sort of talk to people, or was it just kind of like a gut feeling about adventure tourism in Ireland? How did you actually go about validating the idea, so to speak?
Some of it is anecdotal, and I suppose also I threw in there somewhere in between expeditions a master's in international tourism. So I do have I have a piece of paper and some bit of clout in the tourism space in general, and in particular and around adventure tourism. It's something I first switched on to at a conference in Scotland in 2010 after I'd come back from the Atlantic row, and I just was amazed by this world of adventure tourism, and kind of had slowly been studying it, and I'd been working in that space anyway with an adventure centre, but offering very different types of services and offering them in a very different type of way than I do now. I had quite a bit of experience in the space, and I've been researching and looking at what the options were, and then also looking up and down Ireland and seeing what kind of supports were available, and what direction the national agencies were looking in, and tried to align myself as best as possible with regional and national tourism agencies, because if I'm going to be in that industry, there's no point in me trying to sell something that they're not supporting. And if you fall in line with them, all of a sudden you've got this marketing team that you could never afford to have selling your product for you. And that's one of the really interesting things about tourism, and people often miss that, is if you align yourself correctly with a grander plan or an overall strategy for an industry, you can actually get dragged along, not effortlessly, but certainly takes a lot of the weight off my shoulders, that I know that there's people out there selling on my behalf that I haven't even asked to do it.
That's excellent advice. Mike, really enjoyed having you on the show today, and it's been an inspiration both for me and for the listeners, I'm sure. People who may look at your story and feel that they can do these kind of things in their life, not necessarily go and row the oceans like you've done, but at least take on some more adventure in their life, and also go out there and make changes in the sense of, if they're in a job that they don't feel like they feel accomplished, or they feel like they're adding any kind of value, what sort of things they need to do to go out there and make a change in their life. So Thank you so much for coming on the show today. Where do we find out more about you? Because I'm sure that there must be people who want to reach out, who maybe people who want to come to Ireland on one of your tours, people who want to find out more about your adventures, or maybe there's a boat leaving somewhere heading across the Atlantic, needs a spare pair of hands, want to reach out to Mike Jones. Where can people get in touch with you, Mike?
So I've got my own personal website and blog. So all my adventure stuff and blogs from that is on mikejones.ie. So that's due a bit of a refresh. I need to get something going and try and get some new stuff up there. But all the previous adventures are all blogged up there. And then in terms of the business is at mynextadventure.ie. And I think it's a good one name for a business. So if people are thinking about a next adventure and they fancy coming to Ireland, definitely look us up, and we'd be happy to get them out on the water.
That'd be amazing. Hey, Mike, before I let you go, I want to know, what can you share with us in terms of your next adventure? What is public? If you're not allowed to talk about it yet, just give us a tidbit of information on where you're going to head next. Because I'm sure you're scheming up something, right?
Yeah, I do have one big plan. The immediate future is obviously running the business and trying to keep all that stuff going. But I came up with a concept last week. I was very lucky to be working up the west of Ireland on Ireland's biggest island called Achill. So I'm going to spend 3 days, hopefully at the end of this month, circumnavigating Achill and also climbing to its highest point. So I'm calling it Up and Around. And I'm hoping to also use that as an opportunity to film the adventure. And I've never properly made a little movie about an adventure, so I'm tagging making a movie in with that 3 days, and that should give me enough time to do that. Longer term, I've got ambitions for a big sea kayaking trip, a multi-month sea kayaking trip in the polar regions. So that's been on the back burner for a while. And as soon as I've got the business more established, then I can afford to take some time away from it. But it's 2 or 3 months, most likely in the summertime, that I need to be away for. And at the moment, running a seasonal business for myself is I can't really take the time off because there's no one here to run the business. So that's maybe now gone maybe 4 or 5 years down the line. But there's always the lotto as well. I'll keep doing that and see what happens.
But Up and Around, I like the sound of that. Would we find out about that on mikejones.ie or mynextadventure.ie? Where would you put all the content?
I'll definitely be blogging it on mikejones.ie, and I'll probably be linking some of the stuff across to My Next Adventure as well. And we're on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and stuff as well, so people can check us all those channels.
A bit of positive pressure now to update your blog, hopefully, so we can see what's going on.
Absolutely.
Hey, that's Mike Jones, everybody. Extreme kayaker, ocean rower, expedition guide, founder and head of mynextadventure.ie. And we want you to come back on the show in the future as well, Mike, and share with us your future adventures, the kind of things you're involved in, because there must be something else on the horizon that is worthy of sharing with us, as well as how things are going with growing your business. Mike, thank you so much for your time today. Really enjoyed it. An inspiration to everybody. That's Mike Jones, everybody. Mike, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Graham.
Endurance FM, voice of the endurance sport business. Find out more at www.endurancefm.com.